Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to the Audit Committee of Council. I welcome the committee members and especially our new members. Well, we've got some recycled members, so it's good to see we've got a circular economy happening here in Gawler. So welcome back, David. Paul's obviously been here, and to our brand new, so welcome very much. Looking forward to having your input, especially from the internal audit, which is one of the big drivers we're going to see in this council in the next few years. So thank you, Natalie. What else is there? Is there no, have we got any externals? No one from Bentley's or no one? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'd like to acknowledge this land we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So I think we are all here for the first meeting, which is great. No apologies, no motions to grant leave, no leave of absence, and no non-attendance. Now, declarations of interest in relation to the papers that we have before us today. Is there any declarations that need to be recorded? There is a form, there is one, and we have to say none of the committee members. Okay, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on the 11th of November. Thank you, Aaron. Seconded, Peter. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. Okay, we can go straight into our, the business arising, Paul, all captured from those minutes within our agenda today. Thank you. So, into the officer reports, the first one is the appointment of chair and deputy chair. So at this point in time, it's just open for discussion. Thank you. Someone a second. Thank you, Karen. Okay. All in favour? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any nominations? Deputy. Our current deputy is Peter. So. It's either that or the COVID marshal, one of the two. Okay. So thank you. Somebody second. Thanks, Paul. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you for that. And so that's, again, we do this on a 1-year term each, so that we just renew it and look at it and I think it's a good practice. It's a good way to also think about succession planning and those other people that want to sit in the leadership positions as well of this committee. So it's great. Thank you for that. Okay, 6.2, the risk management update. Nathan, are you going to take us through this paper?
Thank you, Chair. So this update was just to provide a summary of what we're doing at the moment. So there's been a fair bit of movement. The first topic was about a risk appetite and risk tolerance consideration that has been discussed a fair bit at this committee. So we looked at a couple of options, and the option that we've done, I've actually put it in front of your desk. I forgot to attach it to the actual agenda, is the scope that was defined by risk services to basically oversee the delivery and the creation of a risk appetite statement, risk tolerances for council, and also assist in the implementation of that system. So that would be starting in April and will be very much involving the executive team, the audit committee, but also the council members to help set those statements and tolerance levels.
Yep. No, it's just here.
So the current scope is this program is free of charge as we're scheme members, so they're providing it to us with no charge. If we have options to move around, we can get it moved, but this is what we've currently looking at conducting.
Well, we do have, I'm jumping, but I know one of the later agenda items is our future meeting dates, and I know there's one planned for the end of March. I mean, I agree with the Mayor that we need to really digest, and maybe even at that March meeting, if that's the date we accept, that we actually get risk services come and present to us how they intend doing this, and what techniques and how they're going to intend and how they're going to engage with the council, because ultimately it'll be great that they'll do it with us and the executive team, but it's that in that council chamber with those councillors that have to really understand, because it is their appetite. So Nathan, you've got yours on.
The elected members haven't really even had a chance to look at the integrity framework review. They haven't had any proper training around risk. We've had one workshop in 2 years, and I just think now we're going to throw an appetite on them, which is quite an advanced piece of work. And I'm sorry, but I feel quite disrespected for that. I don't think that's intended. However, I've been banging on about this for quite some time. I've also been asking for further training for elected members, and it hasn't been forthcoming. And I have to say that I'm very disappointed, because now the elected members will be given quite a high level and high and complex matter, which is called risk appetite, and they haven't had any training around risk apart from one workshop. I just think that's unacceptable. How are we going to go forward? You know, they won't understand, or some of them might, but, you know, I just think that's a little bit unfair on the elected member group.
So Nathan, oh, sorry, Henry, you would like
to? If I could, through the chair, obviously it wasn't intended that the attachment wasn't included. It was a human error, but I also accept it's not reasonable for the committee to endorse it. So, and as you say, Chair, there is a meeting of the committee in March, so we could defer this matter, represent it to the Audit Committee, and, you know, further to the Mayor's comments about training in this particular space, leading up to a session with the elected members, such that it's not just straight into, you know, what is risk appetite, but a more broader introduction and awareness about risk management, and then, you know, the particulars about this particular exercise. So we can bring all that together for the purposes of the report to the March meeting of this committee, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Paul, you wanted to?
Look, I'm of the similar view. I'm struggling with this a little bit. For example, it talks about qualitative statements then matched to quantitative settings using to set a scale, and this becomes the operative, effective, you know, the tolerance, you know, the risk tolerance for each category. Could I just be given an example of that, and of a qualitative statement then followed up by a quantitative settings? Because I might be able to understand it a bit more. Because when I read that, I thought I was actually looking forward to seeing an example, and I didn't see one. So is there an opportunity to have one now?
Can you bring one forward, Nathan, do you think?
I'll go to myself.
It's easier on paper to actually put down and really set it out, but the whole point of a risk appetite is basically give the council guidance rails of the parameters of what they can do stuff in. If they go outside of those parameters, then your risk tolerance really sets in to say, well, can we accept it? How much are we willing to push it by? And that's Karen Rubin has talked about this a lot, that the LGA has been working on risk appetite and risk tolerance for the LGA. It's sort of following the same thing. It gives council guidelines or a set of rails to guide us in the right direction to say, well, this is what we should be aiming for. And then if we go outside of those rails, what sort of tolerance are we willing to accept? So a classic one is like development for council. we're doing a lot of development. So our risk appetite for development and the risk that we take on board with our projects and that, we're actually not a low risk council. We're actually probably taking on board a bit of risk, but that's because our community plan is saying that we're a growing council. We need to have this infrastructure. If we actually had a risk appetite statement that was very low risk, we're not willing to take on board any risk with development, it would actually prevent us from achieving our community plan because of the growth that we've got in this council. Is that sort of a very rough?
So, okay. Karen?
I appreciate what you've just said, Nathan, but you've had years in this portfolio now. And so you've had lots of training, you've delivered a lot of training, and so you've got a really good understanding of risk appetite, risk tolerance. What we've got is an elected member group that have had one workshop, which I think was an hour, okay? It might have been 2, and that was well over 12 months ago. And they haven't been exposed to these types of documents. And so to walk in and say, look, just have a look at this, and this is what we're doing, I can pretty much guarantee that they'll go, oh. And what I'm hoping to avoid is what I've just done and said, well, we need time to learn about this stuff and then understand it, and then we can make an informed decision as a council. So the elected member group hasn't had that opportunity, and some of those members will have training in risk, but some won't. And so I guess my responsibility to them is to make sure that they make informed decisions. And I just don't think right now, there's a step-by-step approach to get them there. And I think we need to follow a step-by-step approach, and training is critical. And risk, when you walk into a risk training, it's quite overwhelming when you first start talking about risk. Well, certainly that was my experience, and just the language is very alien. And so I just don't want to lose the elected members and them get maybe disenchanted and not support what would be a very good body of work.
I think a workshop with the elected members of the Audit Committee is going to be great. It's going to be very timely because we're our community plan. We're moving forwards with that. So what we can do is organise a training session around what is our risk management framework. Then we can also look at our community plan, look at our strategic risk register, which links back to our community plan. And we could do this in a 2-3 hour workshop and actually start talking about that. And while we're talking about the framework, our strategic risks that are linked to our community plan, we can start to touch on a bit about risk appetite and just give them a bit of a dabble before we start moving into the risk appetite program. So 100%, the training for elected members was supposed to happen last financial year when the community plan was being reviewed, but it all got pushed out and delayed, and that's why it's just been pushed out. So I completely agree with you, Mayor, that yes, definitely needs to occur, and more than happy to facilitate this training session.
So Nathan, I can see on the second page that they do have a timetable. So well, it sounds of what we've been discussing, it might not all be completed by June. If we need to get that initial risk management framework, understanding of the basics, how it applies back to the strategic plan, and then at a point in time, introduce then the appetite so they understand what it is that they're, as I said, ultimately setting. Because what it does then, it gives the CE and his management team and all the staff virtually the delegation to go and do these things without having to keep coming back to council.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, yes, there will be things that they're going to say, if you're coming back and for instance, if this council says we will not accept anything that's extreme risk, well then I think the CE and his team shouldn't even be pursuing opportunities and wasting council resources and time putting together business cases that will have that extreme risk level. Okay, so that's what I'm saying is that all that understanding has got to come through, and it's the chamber. I think I tend to see too much of it just going up and training up to executive level, and then, you know, the chamber just sits there and hands just go up, yeah, we'll agree and approve. But I think what the mayor is saying, she wants to take her councillors on the journey along the way so they do understand what it is that they are approving. So, yeah, look, as I said, I've had a quick read of this timetable, but I think that needs to be pushed forward. There's a bit of work up front. And again, I would have thought, given that we've had the local government risk services here doing that initial framework, I would have thought they would have understood the level of where the council was, that they should have maybe put another thing there saying, in this first part, we do the training with the council.
So we can go back to risk services and change the timelines. That's not an issue.
Yep.
Is it preferable that we do this awareness training session with the Audit Committee and the elected members around the risk management framework and also the strategic risk register, and then ask them if they would like further training before we start the risk appetite program? Or is that the way forwards?
Well, they have to direct that. And as I said, if we're going to use the local government risk services and they're going to help you put all this through, as I said, maybe they come back at the next meeting and explain to us and tell us how they intend doing it. And again, maybe talk about how the workshops will be run and so forth. And that's where I think we might give some feedback. As I said, well, I think I've been enough. I'm sure Natalie's been in enough of these workshops. We can maybe provide some guidance. If it's all hitting the mark, we say, fantastic, let's proceed. We might have some comments as to better manage those workshops so that it does actually add value.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for that. So that'll just be held over for the next meeting. So, sorry, David.
Thanks. Just, I suppose, for Nathan's point, my point of view as a councillor going to these workshops, if we can get information as councillors even a week or two before, it's more likely to be read, and lots of diagrams, lots of flow charts, and yeah, simplified. But this whole risk management framework stuff, I think some of the councillors may have been exposed in different ways, and I think it's something that's just vitally important for all our decisions to be seen and highlighted, that this is how all future decision making is going. And I just think if we can get that information early and explain the importance of it, hopefully we'll get good attendance by councillors as well.
Thanks, David. Okay, so the next part is the integrity framework review. Oh, sorry, Paul.
Just on the attachments, page 12 of 149, when it talks about the sample group, asset management and infrastructure, it seems like a very small number of people responded. And it looks like only 2 outdoor staff responded. Is that right? Or 5 out of just like staff, like not supervisory, only 2 outdoor staff responded. And that's actually a big workforce. And when I read the report, it's actually quite almost glowing about people's awareness of integrity and values. But you've only got, looks like only 2 people responded. Is that, am I reading that right? Yep. So do you think that the summary in this report is correct if only 2 people responded in the asset management side of things?
Paul, do you want to turn the...
Oh, yep.
This survey wasn't compulsory by staff. It was sent out to all staff. The depot received hard copies, and if they wanted to fill out the survey, they were able to. Yeah, it wasn't a compulsory survey, and they just might not have either didn't have time or didn't see it, or yeah, but they just did not fill out. Marsh actually said that having a 44% rate of the surveys coming back was actually an excellent return rate. They said generally you're only looking at around the 20 to 25% when you do surveys that aren't compulsory. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, I just thought it was interesting that only a small number of that large department only responded. And then, as I said, the report is quite almost glowing about people's level of integrity knowledge, but yeah, I'm not too sure.
And again, Paul, it just might be, you're right. So maybe they just didn't understand what this was all about. Maybe they had the views that, but we could be pretty scathing on this. So they said we better not do anything. Oh, again, I mean, that could be the reason for it. Well, I don't know. So Nathan, do you want to just, so what's the sense of this report? So where does this go now? So we've got these results. Is that something, Henry, that you're then taking carriage of? Sorry, Nathan?
There we go. So the results have come back. We've met with each of the team leaders that have control of those areas, so procurement, finance and HR. There is a meeting set with executive next Wednesday to be going through the action plan and the outcome of this framework review. And then we've already started, after the exec meeting, those actions the recommendations will be put in place in line with the timelines that have been set by the executive team.
Do we know, so obviously Gawler wasn't there, any council that did this review, but did you get a sense of what some of the other councils, what response rates and how they fared, given, because I assume that this Marsh McLennan would have done the same review for everyone, is that correct? Is that?
Yep. When we spoke to Susan, Gawler was very consistent with what they found in local government. They actually said that South Australia, because the way that the scheme is set up, the areas that Gawler had gaps was very similar to what other councils had gaps in as well. It was very consistent with the other councils. They audited 4 other councils. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember what the names were, but I can find them out. To the point that our team leader of organisational development has contacted 2 of those councils because they had a similar action around the code of conduct and what elements should be in the code of conduct. So our team leader of organisational development is liaising with those councils to work with them to create a code of conduct. So we'll probably have a very similar code of conduct with 3 of those councils.
Any comments from the other committee members on this review?
So just on the fraud control plan and policy, just any comments around that, because there is some recommendations here. So that policy, I believe, was reviewed last year. So that policy will now go back to be reviewed with those extra elements that have been requested or advised that we should be including within that policy. And then that will be coming back through, I believe, Paul, it's the Audit Committee. Yes, and then goes back to Council. I believe governance had earmarked it for the next Audit Committee, but that will be discussed next week at Wednesday, just to look at the actions, who's getting those actions, and just making sure that we can get them completed within a reasonable timeline, because there are, everyone has, sorry.
And when you look through all the recommendations from this whole report, they all come in under that big umbrella of internal audit. Mm-hmm. So again, as we can see, now we've got a 3-year plan, and I don't think a lot of this is already captured in it. But again, as we've always said, that internal audit plan is fluid. It's just going to keep changing to the needs and the requirements. And if it means we've got to drop another audit or push it a bit later on to accommodate all these, that's what I'd like to see keep coming back to this committee, because we're here to endorse it, and then, it just makes it happen. So Paul, first.
Yeah, on attachment 17 of 149, Nathan, someone just explain that risk owner matrix to me, just so I got a clear understanding of that and how we got those little dots where they were.
That's from these ones here. Okay, that's from the risk register. So they were the ratings that this workshop arrived at, and is now plotted on this heat map, which is really a risk matrix. Yeah, that's yep. And what it's saying is obviously you need to be more in the right top corner. You want active management.
Bottom left corner, which is no major concerns. They're low risk. If you're in active management, that's in the red area, which means that there's a concern that we need to act quickly.
Okay, I thought they were the controls that were saying that it was actively managed.
Oh, sorry. No, it's, yeah. So basically a lot, the areas that they risk, we've got processes, policies, procedures in place to assist in preventing fraud and corruption. The two areas that were highlighted was 1 and 2 around fandom vendors and the splitting of purchase orders. So there's why there are some actions aligned to those, identified areas.
So can I just give an example? So I mean, one of the areas again, and it's people know procurement is a very sensitive area where this can happen. Now we're finding things like I'm reading here that no major concern for kickbacks, bribery, those type of things. Now, again, I'll be interested to know how council actually knows that that's not happening, not managing. And I'll give you the classic example is the latest case from the NAB that I've been reading, where the executive of the CEO has just perpetrated a $12 million fraud. It's just quite amazing because she had such a good relationship with the one provider that did leadership development courses for the NAB executive over these last 6-7 years. Yeah, it's just amazing. But again, now I'm sure that their internal audit and their heat map would have said exactly the same. We don't have that. We don't have that. It's really trying to now get into this and really, and again, look, maybe that's why people aren't responding to surveys either.
Also, I mean, when I looked at phantom vendors, that's 2, that's sort of over there. I would have thought it might have been up in the red bit because that's something that happens a lot. You know, that people send invoices, to companies and they pay them. And that's happened, we know, locally. I mean, it's a very serious thing. And we've talked about it before at this committee, and I don't think we've actually worked out how we're going to stop that. And I would have thought that would have been right up in the active management side of things. Because somebody can send a phantom invoice and you're stuffed. But it's down there. It's almost in the no concern area.
Well, again, there seems to be a lot of, from that particular risk, there's numerous controls in here. But interesting, when I read what the controls rating is partially effective. So when it's partially effective, it means that something's going to get through the net. So, but again, though, Paul, what it comes back to is when you come to do that final residual rating, you've got to get that right. And if you got that wrong and you're pushing it down to no major concern, well, then, yep. So again, I think, sorry, Natalie.
Microphone. One thing, because just sort of interpreting what they've done, they've focused on the 3 risks with the workshops, 3 areas of risk. Now, fraud risk is a lot bigger than those 3 areas. I'm doing a similar exercise at my current workplace, and our number 1 risk is cybersecurity and hacking, and that's not on here at all. That is your number 1. And especially with at the moment with the current environment, everyone's working from home. It's running rife throughout organisations, so you'd expect that to be on the heat map. Whether that's just focused on the 3 areas that they're looking at, but happy to have an offline conversation with you to share a couple of notes if you want.
Thanks, Natalie. So So again, maybe Nathan and Jen, if you're going to discuss this at the executive level and talk about it, maybe it's not a complete set of information. You can maybe start on looking at this and who's going to do and manage what. But again, I think what Natalie's just said is, in these areas of financial, human resource and procurement, there are some other key risks that maybe haven't been picked up that also would need to be assessed. So I don't know whether through mutual liability, whether Marsh and McLennan are going to come back, whether you're going to take it on board and do that for the council.
So the scope of this audit was predefined. We were part of a pilot program, and it was purely around integrity. So talking about staff purposely misleading and doing something. Last year we had a cybersecurity audit with penetration testing, and we've got some more happening. I believe it's this year, because we're working with IT on new servers, which will introduce a whole new set of risks, and that's all being tested. With yourself, Peter, yeah, work with exec, go through the action list and that, but we can definitely start to look at if the audit committee, the elected members or councils are concerned in a particular area, we can definitely draft a scope of an audit, bring it, see if that's what the concerned area is, and we can start to work and move in that space.
Thanks. Karen?
So with our internal audit program, I think Bentley's are doing it. Are they covering off on cyber security?
Yes, that's been identified that we're replacing our servers or upgrading our servers for council. Some of it is moving into the cloud. And then as part of that development, we'll be doing a cybersecurity audit on the new servers and the new online provision, because there's a new set of risks coming in. So that will be, yes.
I asked whether Bentley's have included it in their internal audit program. They have. Okay.
So we know what needs to happen for that part. So part 3 now is the internal audit program, and there's an asset management scoping document that Bentley's have put forward. Now, Nathan, was this the first one that they, because again, remember the discussion at the committee level last time when we approved the program, was that yes, we've got all the different topics, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Bentley's have to be the one and only providers of those services. Now, was this the one that we said yes to get the kicking off of the internal audit program? This was the one that we're going to do, or was it another?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, so the committee agreed to use Bentley's for the first 2. So the asset management is the first one off the ranks. And then the next one is our business continuity and IT disaster recovery audit. So we'll be using them for the first 2. And then after that, we can come back to the committee and discuss which providers we use to facilitate the other audits in that schedule.
Okay. Can I just say, so my understanding was we were going to give them the first one, and I'm just mindful of the IT security, and again, Natalie's comment about cyber security. Are Bentley's the best organisation to do that type of a review, given the systems of council? Again, I mean, if there are IT audit firms out there that would know this stuff back to front, and again, I'm just mindful, again, it's all well and good to have, we'll mostly see the scope again, but I want to make sure that the people coming out and doing it are actually qualified and have done these type of reviews and understand what is it doing, because we don't want to pay for the audit. It just comes out in here's a generic review. Yes, we found a few things, but deep down they should have found something else that we should be fixing pronto. So just be mindful. Again, we're happy to review this scoping document, and we'll provide some feedback. I think it's important that for the next one, that we really think about going further and wider than just giving it to Bentley's at this point in time.
I can ask Bentley's. I believe they outsource the IT security. So they don't actually do it themselves. They're outsourcing the actual testing and penetration, because exactly what you said, there are companies and that is their sole job to do. But yeah, we can definitely chat about it when we start getting close to that audit.
Okay. So do you want to take us through the asset management scope? Oh, it's great.
Thank you. So the attached asset management scope is effectively copied and pasted straight out of what was proved out of the 3-year internal audit plan, covering off the elements that Peter Fairley-Jones was very interested in around donated and contributed assets. Basically, it's the A to Z of asset management. It is a higher level. They're not going into a deep dive into one area, but what they've indicated in the, I suppose, briefing meeting that Paul Hord and Henry Inat attended last week is that if they, during the audit, if they do find any concerns in an area that may need a deep dive to find out some more information, then Henry will be the first person contacted on that one, and then we can bring that back to the audit committee.
So any questions on the scope? Natalie?
Just one comment I had was whether they can just be mindful of highly desirable assets. I've seen in other organisations that a lot of depots are buying TV screens, IT equipment in order to do Zoom calls and remain connected with teams. However, because they're below the capitalisation threshold, those assets aren't being capitalised, but they're not being tagged. So you almost need a highly desirable asset register if it's below that capitalisation threshold, but you've got tracks on them because they'll all end up going missing.
Peter?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good framework to work from. The only thing I thought that may be missing here is the need to look at the process for removing assets that are, being replaced or built over or whatever. We've got a lot here in relation to new assets, but there's got to be something about the retirement of existing assets so they don't just sit on the system. So that would be the only query I have. Yep.
And does council have a lot of intangible assets as well? No, none at all. No software, no nothing that or built up or developed, nothing, no your own programs.
Through the chair, we don't. Yeah, I'm certainly not aware of any, and we don't capture or reference any in the annual accounts.
Okay, do you need anything further than Nathan before? What time frame are we expecting this to be completed and brought back to the committee?
So my first meeting with them is next week, where we'll be setting out the documents that they require, setting up all the meetings. They're hoping to have it started in March, and they're saying within 6 weeks they would like a turnaround with an interim report, a draft report, of which will then be going to the executive and also to this audit committee to look at the draft report. That way, if there's any questions, clarifications that you would like, Bentley said that they would attend that. Basically, it'd be a workshop effectively where we can go through the actual asset management audit and their interim findings. Yeah, so 6 weeks is what they're hoping to have the draft report, and then I'll have to look at your meeting, audit committee times just to work out when we can meet.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the risk management update? Okay, so we've got a recommendation that we note the risk management update report, but we've also provided a fair bit of feedback in relation to the risk appetite tolerance and how that's going to go forward. Also in relation to the integrity framework review and how that's going to go forward, and some comments in relation to the internal audit program scope and document for asset management that you can take back to Bentley's. So thank you for that. So can I have someone to move? you, Karen. Someone to second that? Thank you, Natalie. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you, Nathan. Yes. 6.3, second quarter budget review. Paul?
And thank you, Chair. This is obviously the second of 3 budget reviews we're doing for this financial year. And if I just reference, Chair, what I see is the key points that we sort of referenced in the document. You'll note from the recommendations that we're proposing, or the outcome of the suggested recommendations contained therein from an operational perspective, is that the deficits would be reducing slightly from the adopted budget of 1.689 million to 1.538 million. Also noting in the recommendation number 2, just I guess continuing to note the fact that that sizable deficit is highly informed by the COVID economic stimulus packages that the council has provided as a one-off this financial year, and with those exclusions removed from the equation, the deficit would be estimated deficit would be $193,000. From an operating budget perspective, members, the key variations we're proposing to the committee tonight is one in relation to the number of the volume of development application fees, and members, council members will have seen through the monthly finance reports that presented that there has been a massive spike in the number of DAs that council has received, in the order of over 100% increase in volume of the number of DAs, which then had a flow-on effect with the revenue received. So we're proposing a $114,000 increase in that revenue stream. That similarly from a development perspective too, relative to Gawler East, there has been a recent spike with the number of new allotments created, and that's had a flow-on effect in terms of the new allotment contributions that we receive from those developers, which we're also including in the budget as a variation. One of the other key ones, members, is relative to the timing of the $912,000 that we will be getting from the federal government as part of the phase 2 stimulus funding. Members might be aware, council in late 1920 financial year, we as a initial stimulus measure, Chair, we received I think about $405,000 non-tied funding. Nonetheless, we did need to identify what those projects were aligned to. That's been identified. Council has since turned its mind to what projects the $912,000 for phase 2 is aligned to. However, when we first were aware of that additional funding that came in, we did provide for that in the first quarter budget review as additional funding. However, what has since become evident is that the timing of when we get that funding will be heavily in the 2021-22 financial year, because the projects that are aligned to that funding don't need to be completed until the end of this calendar year. And the understanding is that the lion's share of that funding will now be received in 21-22. So in response to that, in consideration of that, members, we're proposing, just purely from a cash flow timing perspective, of deferring that $812,000 revenue to the 21-22 budget. However, conversely, members, that does also impact on the timing of those capital works. So the timing of those capital works will also coincide with the 21-22 financial year, but nonetheless thought it was appropriate to flag that in the review and bring it to your attention tonight. The last point I wanted to other key variation I wanted to reference was we're proposing a nominal reduction in interest expense, and that's been informed essentially by our current cash flow for this financial year and the continuing reduced interest rates. When we get to the next item, Chair, I just wanted to reference recent conversations we've had with the LGFA relative to converting some of our variable interest rate debt to fixed interest rate, given the movement in interest rates that has occurred in the last month. But that's, as I see, as the key variations table, but certainly happy to answer any questions members may have.
Thanks, Paul. Open it up to the committee. Comments on the quarter review? Karen?
Thank you. I'm looking at page 12 of the agenda, and I'm looking at the financial indicators, and we're working outside our financial indicators currently with our operating ratio and our adjusted operating ratio, and we're also nearly at our limit for our net financial liabilities ratio. Our debt levels are reasonably high compared to our budget. So just as much as debt is good, not necessarily when it starts to impact on financial liabilities. So just a question around, you know, and our asset sustainability is well over 100%. So we're loading up our capital projects. You know, is there a better way of managing our financial indicators?
Through the Chair, Mayor, certainly very valid points you raise. Members might recall at the first budget workshop a couple of weeks back, I did have a slide saying that, yes, we've got to be, debt is not necessarily a bad thing. However, the important thing is it's got to be properly managed, and in saying that, got to be certainly mindful of the liabilities ratio, but also the council's capacity to repay that debt over time. So from an industry perspective, yes, our policy targets are pretty much, Chair, consistent with the industry, and yes, noting that the liabilities ratio is certainly getting close to that threshold, and as members who have been on the council for a while will recall that ratio has about 10 years ago was at 86%. I think Mayor got it down to 43%, then invested heavily in this building such that it went up to the mid 80s. So yes, but I'm very cognizant of the fact that we need to keep within that ratio target. And as I have said previously, Mayor, I also think it's appropriate. There has to be a sort of bit of provision for contingency in that ratio, such that referencing the likes of, I think in September 2016 when we had a major flood and we had to do a significant amount of asset reinvestment, replacement. So that rest assured members, very much that's at the forefront of my thinking, that with the upcoming budget discussions, council will have to be very cognizant of those indicative ratios, not only for 21-22, so such that they're not looking at 21-22, Chair, in isolation. They need to be looking at it in the longer term context. And with the operating ratio, those figures, they're obviously based on the actual, like the $1.5 million deficit, as I touched on. If you remove the COVID stimulus items, that does reduce that extensively. However, again, from the 21-22 perspective, and council will need to turn its mind to how what's our approach to returning back to an sustainable operating surplus as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Paul. Any other questions? David will go first and then Peter.
Yeah, just while we're on these tables, I certainly do have concerns with our budgets for next year and the following year with taking on new community assets that we're being gifted and reserves and our service levels. Because I do think from what I'm seeing on the ground that staff are struggling to keep up with that. And we've also, a lot of the equipment at the depot is, I think they need 2 new backhoes, a new truck, and there's quite a lot of capital expenditure that we've been putting off as a council too. So I do think the whole debt and what we can actually provide to our community services, I think is something that we really need to get a really strong handle on, because I feel the last couple of years it's just especially starting to blow away again.
And I think, David, we all know COVID has impacted a lot of organisations, private, public, the whole lot. I think the important part is that, okay, there is some spikes and some, shakes to the actual, to me, that long-term financial plan. When does it come back to these levels that you, as council, have said you cannot expect that? And we know in the long term, it can't just be within these for the 10 years. It will move. The question is, and that's where we've got the financial team to keep looking at that and continuously advising the CE as to when it will all come back into levels. Now, again, we could have another big COVID outbreak in 3 years' time, and you'll do the same things as a council. You do all these initiatives and end up having to cost you money. And that's why the long-term financial plan is in there. I mean, if we saw this and there was debt being built up, and asset, and the long-term financial plan is just not to be seen that you're going to be coming back into a surplus situation, then you'd be having a big reason as a council to be concerned about those kind of decision-making, financial decision-making. So Paul, maybe from a long-term financial plan, okay, this has had an impact 2021, and then there's a bit more in 21, 22, but for the next 10 years?
Yes, through the chair, certainly Councillor Hughes' comment relative, I'm assuming you mean gifted assets from the developers. Yes, that each year, really, I think for about the last 5 or 6 years, that's been in the order of $2 to $3 million. My intel this stage, Chair, is that will be considerably higher this year because of the rate of growth that's been occurring. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of the extra rate of growth. From a revenue perspective, at this stage suggests our growth will be over 2%. Face value is all well and good. However, as members are aware, there is an expenditure consequence with that, and it's not only with the assets that come on board from the developers, because they're essentially depreciable assets on their books as soon as they come under council's stewardship. But there's also the maintenance consequences of them, whether it's the roads, with street sweeping, street lighting, reserves with the service levels there. So yes, very much mindful of the impact that has on an ongoing basis in the longer term. And that's why, Chair, I've always been passionately saying in this forum with elected members that from a capital expenditure perspective, the focus each year always has to be really on replacement renewal, replacing what you've got. I've always looked at that as being non-discretionary expenditure, thereby maintaining your asset base. And then in terms of discretionary expenditure, that's your new and upgraded assets. And bearing in mind that those new and upgraded assets will have ongoing maintenance consequences on the council via maintenance and depreciation. So that's why we do always say that setting a budget shouldn't be done in isolation, because you need to know what the ongoing implications financially are, particularly from assets that are constructed.
Thanks. Peter, you're...
Chair, Yeah, I've been concerned about the negative performance against targets. However, this quarter does, in fact, they do come in around about the original adopted budget level or a little bit better on a couple of occasions. Notwithstanding that, we did have the long-term financial plan giving us a pathway to resolving some of these things. However, that required, a number of assumptions to come true and have to be monitored each year, of course. And the comments you've made about the growth spike now is very true, and there is an expenditure side to that, and hopefully there's an economy of scale benefit or dividend from all of that, which can help the progress. But the fact that all this development is happening now may mean that that will drop off down the track. It may not be just a straight line. However, that's beyond our powers of forecasting accurately. So yeah, I think this year's budget will be quite interesting to go through, and the long-term plan that goes with it. So I'll be interested to see how that pans out. The other thing I did notice elsewhere in the agenda that and I don't think we've been aware of this before, but the money that wasn't used through the COVID, not the JobKeeper, but the
Job seeker.
the money that was provided for concessions to ratepayers. Only a handful of people actually took that up, and then there was about 500,000 or something or other that was given back to all ratepayers. I'm not sure how that was done. Was that like a flat amount per person per rate property? So it was probably raised by way of a graduated contribution based on valuation, but given back. So some would have got more than they had given, etc. But I mean, it's minor in the scheme of things. But I was a bit surprised to see that, given the deficit situation, that the money was passed back to ratepayers. And yeah, maybe someone can enlighten me on what the rationale would.
Yeah, it was really difficult for councillors not to do that. The way the report was written, with the option, in black and white, of giving your ratepayers that money back, there was no way. I mean, as soon as I saw the officer's report, read the report, it was like, we've got no choice. I mean, it wasn't written in a way that councillors could do anything but. I mean, if I had a choice, I would have completely changed that report and really underplayed that even as an option. But unfortunately, it was like number one option, and it was really not a great report. I was a bit disappointed because there was no choice. The councillors had no choice.
Okay. That's it, Peter. Yep. Thanks. Anything else from? Nope. Okay, thank you, Paul. We got a recommendation, a three-part recommendation up there, that we recommend to council to adopt the estimates of the revised operating deficits. Continue to be noted that the forecasting operating deficit is informed by the 815 of COVID economic stimulus programs, 530 of one-off COVID-19 general rates remissions, exclusive which would result in an estimated operating deficit of 193, and the revised 2021 budget position is further informed by a decrease of 546k in capital expenditure, an increase in capital grants received 270k. Someone to move that way, please. Thanks, Peter. Seconded, David. Did you? Okay, all in favour? Okay, thank you. Okay, 5.4, the Treasury Management Review. So this comes to us once a year.
Yes, thank you through the chair. As you rightly touch on, this is an annual report we provide to you, and bearing in mind this relates obviously to the 2019-20 financial year. The main point I really just want to make, members, was that we do continually manage Council's treasury management in accordance with our treasury management policy, and that incorporates cash flow management on a daily basis, with transactions between us and the LGFA occurring on a daily basis, such that we are minimising our net interest costs. And but I'm happy to take any questions, but I did also, Chair, want to just comment after any questions from the floor relative to recent discussions with the LGFA about movements in interest rates, but happy to take any questions just for the moment.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions, Peter?
And that was my question about the LGFA. Have they been, because you know, this year's hear more and more talk about inflation starting to creep into the system again, and there's a rising yield curve, which I'm no expert in these things, but means that longer-term interest rates are going higher, indicating that people are looking at long-term things, are looking at higher interest rates and more inflation. So it sounds like we're approaching a time when with all the stimulus and all the commodity price increases, inflation starts to creep back in again, and interest rates follow before you know it. So I'm just wondering what the LGFA might be able to say about that, because no doubt they would have noticed these things.
Yes, look, through the Chair, I was mindful of the fact that, as members be aware, 10 years ago we had all our debt locked in fixed debt, and in 2011 or thereabouts, away from that fixed interest to the generally what the sector more broadly has been doing, using the cash advance debentures, which is at a variable floating interest rate, and that's been very beneficial. And in that respect, if I draw your attention to page 15 of 43, with the table 1 on the top page, just to give the background context there, those historic loans from 2007 through to 2011 of $3 million each year, those interest rates, though the interest rates on those loans were fixed for the 15-year life of the loan, and you'll see obviously back then the interest rates that we fixed were way higher than they are now, and the variable interest rates we're currently paying on the cash advance debentures, Erin will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 2.05%, I believe, and what sort of facilitated a recent discussion with the LGFA was I was mindful of the fact that you'll see from that table 1 again on page 15 that under the Treasury management policy, we've appropriately got the position where we don't put all our financial eggs in one basket, Chair, in terms of splitting our debt between fixed and variable, which is an appropriate course of action. And the policy stipulates essentially that's, I think, no less than 25% represented by fixed interest. Now, I noted that obviously if we continue the trend we're doing, we'll be going under that policy threshold. Now, members, until now, I haven't really been relatively concerned about that, predominantly from the fact that the variable interest rate has always been considerably lower than the fixed interest rate. However, a recent discussion with the LGFA, when I asked them to give us indicative fixed interest rates, I did notice for the first time in quite a few years that the fixed interest rate for 5 years is now actually about 0.25 to 0.3% lower than the CAD rate, and that's the first time I've seen it for quite a few years. So straight away that pricked my interest in terms of, you'll see obviously from that table 1 what the level of our variable interest rate debt is, Now, bearing in mind this was at 30 June 2020, but the dollars, by all intents and purposes, are around similar value. So straight away, my mind turned to the fact, well, should we be converting a sizable chunk of that variable interest debt, which is currently at 2.05%, but subject to market change in interest rates. The LGFA said that that can be locked in for 5 years at 1.8%. So in crunching the numbers, I think it worked out like for $5 million, if that was, for argument's sake, what we locked in, that would be a guaranteed interest saving for each year for 5 years in the order of 25 to 30,000 on that $5 million. But we could lock away considerably more, but I just wanted to raise it with the committee tonight, Chair, to indicate this is what I'm recommending as a sort of course of action in terms of that debt management to minimise our interest costs, but B, also get that slightly better mix between fixed and variable interest rate exposure.
Just, yeah, thank you for that, Paul. So the question would be, at what point do we jump and do the targets need reviewing at some point from a split point of view? So the loan type portfolio targets, at what point do we change them? Because they might need to be changed to reflect current market.
That's the policy, isn't there?
That's right, but do we need to change the policy?
Oh,
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, at what point, if we're going to go down the road of fixed, if for example, we go down the road of fixed interest rate, lock them in, and if we lock in a sizable chunk because it's 1 point whatever it was, which is not too bad. I mean, I don't understand the market, but clearly there's some signs that the market might change, and clearly they have changed. So, you know, it's a bit like trading on the share market, I guess. You know, it's a bit of a gamble, but is there a calculated gamble that we might actually win? And I certainly am quite interested in protecting our interests, because the last thing we want is high interest rates and we've got 18 million, majority of which are variable interest rate subject to the market. That is an exposure, that's a risk for us now, if the predictions are correct.
Thanks, Natalie.
And just a couple of questions, because I've only been here for 2 minutes, so sorry if I'm asking the obvious. It comes down to, now, yeah, okay, cool. And it goes to your risk appetite statement around your loan balances. I'm assuming with the fixed rates, those high fixed rates, there's nothing you can do about that. That just has to run its course. Is that correct? And then the second question was with the fixed amount, is the LGA going to cap the amount that you can fix? Because when you think down's like 1.8, you can only go down to 0, but you can go all the way back up to your 7.88%. So I would say to lock it in. But yeah, so that's the question. Is there a limit on how much you can lock in?
Yes, through the chair. I don't believe there's any limit we can lock in. And in recent discussions with the LGFA, I was initially of the view that they might be needing a recommendation from council in this regard to convert, but they're saying because we're not increasing our debt, we're really just managing the existing debt. They said it can be done within 24 hours, essentially by exchange of emails. And Mayor, in relation to your question, I think about the policy targets, notice on page 15 that table 2 references what the policy target is. So it's referencing a minimum of 25% with a fixed interest and a minimum 30% variable. And I've put in that table what those ratio results were as at 30 June 20. So they're very close to the mark in terms of the fixed interest. However, what will obviously happen when we convert a sizable component from variable to fixed, those percentages will materially change, such that will then be well within those policy thresholds. And professionally, Chair, I don't see the need to change that policy position, but happy for conversation in that space. The other point I did agree with the LGFA on was that the first point they put to me when I said, well, look, we'd be potentially interested in converting a chunk of money from variable to fixed. The first question they rightly asked was, well, how quickly are you looking to expire your current variable debt? And I said, well, based on long-term projections at the moment, that will be sort of coming down marginally, but certainly for the next 5 years, we'll have a sizable variable interest rate debt such that they could see that being the case. They couldn't see any issue with and thought it would be the appropriate outcome to lock it in for 5 years at 1.8, because their advice was they can't really see interest rates going any lower, and their view is, if anything, interest rates will stay stable for a period of time, but then they will gradually rise again.
Paul, just quick, can I just, so what do some of the other councillors do? You obviously talk to your counterparts. Are they all looking at, obviously this offer is not just Gawler, this is across the board, local government in South Australia. What are they talking about or attempting to do?
Yes, a valid point, Chair, and that was certainly a question I put to the LGFA, because I know across the sector there has been a high utilisation of the CAD for the very reason, as we've articulated previously, that unlike the fixed, and sorry, Natalie, just to answer your question before I move on, with the fixed rates, the fixed loans, we have previously gone to the LGFA and said, well, look, what will be the cost if we were to pay them out? And there's massive financial penalties in doing so, to the extent that it's sort of really cost prohibitive to do that. Noting that those fixed loans will be repaid in full by 2026. The first one will be paid off in the 22-23 budget, and then incrementally thereafter. Sorry, I lost track just when I was remembered the question you asked. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's okay. That's it.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I've generally known more broadly that the other councils have used a high reliance on the variable interest rate debt, but the LGFA said we were essentially really leading the pack in this regard in terms of how we've been managing our debt, and the fact that essentially we're one of the first cabs off the rank to touch base with them in terms of converting to a fixed rate, because as I touched on before, it's the first time in a long time that I've known a fixed interest rate to be actually lower than the variable interest, and I wanted to take advantage of that.
If I could just make a comment relative to Paul's comment about making such a decision under delegation as opposed to, formal deliberations by this committee and possibly council. I must admit, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that sort of decision being made and actioned under delegation. And if we are having a meeting in March of the Audit Committee, maybe we bring the matter back for confirmation to proceed as what Paul's indicating, i.e. lock in that 1.8% at 5 years. Paul, do you have any concerns about timeframes relative to that?
Through the Chair, no. And as I touched on before, Chair, I was initially of the view, and had a chat with my colleagues, that I was expecting the LGFA would be requiring a council resolution to do that conversion, but they said that wasn't the case because purely all we were doing was converting the interest rate attracted to existing debt. We weren't actually asking council to borrow any more. However, if there is the view that there should be a council decision, then yes, we can put that to a report. I just mindful at the end of the day, Chair, obviously keen to make that conversion while the interest rates are at the rate they are. I don't suspect they'll change in the next couple of weeks, but the sooner we can do this, I think, the better.
Karen?
Is there a penalty for paying off once it's fixed? Is a similar penalty apply, or does the LGFA not apply a penalty for early removal of debt?
Through the Chair, with the locking in a component of our variable interest rate debt, what that would mean, Mayor, is that we would be just incurring that your 1.8%, for example, interest on that debt fixed for 5 years, and that at the end of that 5 years, it's then entirely up to council. Well, does it convert that to go back to variable? Does it fix it again? So there's no real sort of penalties attached to it because the intent would be based on our long-term plan forecast over the next 5 years. It would indicate that we wouldn't be in a position where our cash advance debenture balance would be getting lower than $5 million, for example. So there wouldn't be any risk in locking it in for the 5 years, and such that there wouldn't be any risk with any financial penalties. It's really just taking advantage of the lower interest rate for a fixed term.
And Paul, and the reason I asked the question about other councillors doing it, and it's good to know that you're saying you're leading the pack, is that like any good financial, which is the banking institution, if others get a wind of this and they're told, hey, you can lock into 1.8, there'll come a point where they say, sorry, you know, it's like the casino, all bets are frozen, you know, they won't give you any more. You know, that's what this is all about. So it does come back to what Natalie said, it's this risk appetite of a council of how quickly they want to move on things like this, because by, again, in 2 weeks' time, if other councils, you know, and don't tell me that the LGFA aren't speaking that to their customers. They're telling them right now, hey, do you want to lock in 5 years at 1.8? You won't get it again. So, sorry, Peter, and then Henry.
So it's my understanding that the LGFA are actually recommending this. I mean, they're leaving it to you, but they're strongly suggesting. In which case, I mean, I wouldn't take my view, or none of us are experts in the financial markets to that extent. If they're recommending, then I would see that as the basis. And I understand Henry's point about getting a council approval, but I wonder whether that's something that could be got for the February meeting, or is that maybe, yeah, maybe, I don't know, it's probably a couple of...
Henry, you're going to...
That was my thought. If based on this conversation, this committee now is happy to make that adjustment and or recommendation, well, that'll be much appreciated, and then we can proceed accordingly.
Madeline?
Sorry, just one more question. How much is it looking at, what percentage are you looking at locking in? Did I miss that before?
Through the Chair, that's the $1 million question, to which, pun intended, to which I don't know the answer, but I would certainly be, just being cognizant of the interest rates being as low as they are, I would be advocating that there'll be a sizable amount in the order of potentially 5 to 10 million that we could lock in at that rate. But that would, that would be heavily informed in terms of what our longer term plan says in relation to debt movement. But that being the case, and knowing how the debt wasn't looking to materially decrease in coming years, I just think, it would be prudent to lock in a sizable amount to take advantage of that rate.
Looking at, we're about 13.8 variable at the moment. So you're only saying 5, is that right? Still leaves 8. Yep.
Through the chair, if I can just clarify, the balance on page 15, that was as at 30 June. And last time I checked, Erin's all over this like a rash, but last time I looked, it was about 18 million in CAD balance. So what I'm saying, members, is that the variable component on that table, which is 13.8, that's now in the order of, last time I looked, about 17 and a half. And the fixed amounts has reduced to just under 4 mil. But the variable one is the point of interest.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, yeah, just looking at that, why only 5 and not more? Yep.
Yeah, through the chair, look, personally, I'd prefer to lock in as much as we could, but I guess it ultimately comes down to the appetite of how much we do lock in, but at that rate, and again, Councillor Kosh, it needs to be informed of what our longer term financial plan forecasts are, but I know here and now that we're not going to be in a position where our debt's suddenly going to be less than $5 million in 5 years. So there's no risk of 5 years' time having a debt locked in of 5 mil and suddenly having cash in the bank earning a very nominal interest. So there's no risk whatsoever in that regard. The only risk really is in relation to future interest rate movements, and I don't think anyone's an expert in that field, but certainly the advice from the LGFA and also from a presentation that the NAB did at a seminar I was at last week was suggesting that the existing rates would plateau for possibly the next 12 months, but thereafter would be trending back up.
Peter?
Yeah, through the chair. In terms of the amount, the problem with the cash advance thing is it bounces around throughout the whole year, and you've probably got a lot of your rate revenue in up front, and you're still going to spend that in a higher degree over the next few months of the financial year, and you're going to end up basically maybe somewhere near where you are last financial year. I don't know what the projections are, but assuming that's the case, if you were to convert 5 million based on this table, you're almost around about 50-50 cash advance and fixed, with the 5 million put into fixed. That to me sounds reasonable in terms of hedging your bets, because nobody knows what's going to happen. That's hardly needs to be mentioned, but 5 million does seem like a reasonable amount, and still gives you capacity to, even over the next 5 years, if circumstances apply even during the year, that you can reduce the cash advance down. You've still got capacity to reduce the cash advance down to the extent that they are there, that is there during that time. So 5 million does sound around about right. I would have no concern if it went to 6 million or something. It's not a problem, and you're still within the ratios that the policy deals with, and I think it would be a good decision.
Natalie?
Just so that, got a Bachelor of Finance that I did a million years ago. What pretty much the same methodology, and going on the quick numbers that were being said, whether you take the variable amount of, was it 17 and a half? You take half of, it's more than 5, but half of that, because I did a quick back of the envelope, and I think if you convert half, shall we work that out? Half of that, then it comes out to be around your 50% is fixed and variable. To get that 50, like 50-50, you chip on black and red.
Yeah.
So that's what we look, well, again, I mean, you can do all the calculate, talk about it with Henry, and then put the paper up to council.
So if I can just make one further comment in relation to graph 2 on page 16 of 43. Peter, as you referenced, with the cash advance debentures on the variable component, as cash flow permits, we can repay that anytime during the year. Now, what that graph 2 does demonstrate with the line graph is you'll see what we're indicating there is what the actual CAD balance was during the year for 2019-20. And you'll see, it's no coincidence that you'll see when the quarterly rate payments come in September, December and March, that's when we have a sizable drop in the CAD debt. Because as I touched on earlier, as soon as the funds come in that same day, Aaron's emailing LGFA to transfer as much funds as we can. So I just thought it was important to indicate that's the sort of movement we have on an annual basis with that variable debt.
Okay. So, Paul, that's all about the review, and we've done what you want to give you the endorsement. Anything with the policy before we pass this? So just minor changes in the policy itself?
Through the chair, I don't believe we were proposing any changes to the policy, Aaron, were we? And in saying that, we have certainly gone through that policy, but I believe it does continue to suit our purposes. It is reviewed annually. Chair and Peter may recall that a couple of years ago we did get it independently reviewed, and yeah, I still think it's an appropriate policy and not proposing any change.
Yeah, no, with variable interest, yeah. Yeah. And to fixed interest to achieve a 50% ratio.
No, no. Yeah. Through the chair, what we have to make is as soon as we converted that to 50%, that would be different today if funds come in. So that will, it always will fluctuate, but I think as a starting place, it's that. Yes.
Yeah, happy with that?
Yes. That certainly does give us place to work on. So.
Okay, no more bets, please.
In terms of that wording and how it could otherwise be interpreted by another party and not being locked into that for, time memorial, obviously, I'm just thinking whether or not we need some flexibility, something to the effect that it reads, well, investigate converts percentage current and that the policy be adopted.
That the investment policy.
The investment policy be adopted thereafter as as considered prudent. I'm just wanting to make sure it's not just locked into the 50/50.
Yeah, for sure, yeah, going forward, yeah. And the second one? Investment.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that'll
Ratio for a period of 5 years.
yeah.
Yep. Yep. And for review. After that, this period, yep, after this period. Whoa. Oh, the back arrow, thank goodness. Yeah. Paul, you happy? Yeah. Considers converting. Yep. 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 Because then there'll be more debate in the chamber. And the, you happy with that, Paul? Okay. Okay, someone to move. Okay, thanks, Natalie. Seconded by Karen. All in favour? Thank you. Okay, 6.5 are the external audit opinions from last year's audit by Galpins. Galpins, Natalie, for your, was the first year they've done the audit. So previously, who was it? Dean Newbury did it for many, many years and went out to tender, and Galpins ended up winning. Tim Mulhauser. There'll be, and what was it? Is it 3+2 that we gave them? Was it? Was it the 4-5? 4-5, was it? Okay. So any comments on this? I think it's pretty straightforward. So they're just handing us that. Yep. Peter, happy to move. Thank you. Second. David, all in favour? Okay, carried. Okay, 6.6 again is their data analysis report as at 31 December. Paul?
Yes, through the chair. Certainly recognise the percentage outstanding has been creeping up, bearing in mind, as we've noted there, and members in the report, the impact of council's decision, like a lot of other councils, to suspend debt collection in the middle of COVID. So you need to be mindful of that. However, as we have noted in the report, we are very much now having turned our mindset to getting back into the normal sort of debt collection process practices in accordance with our debtor management policy, such that, yes, we can hopefully expect to then get a reduction back down to hopefully more closer to our target position by 30 June this year. happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Freedom.
Chair, my only question really is in relation to the sale of properties component, the 3 years accumulated or more. How many properties and how much is in that category? And presumably that area doesn't help matters in terms of the percentages. So how much is involved in all of that, do you know?
Through the chair, look, I don't have my finger right on that figure, Peter. But we do periodically turn our mind to identifying properties that are sort of incrementally getting near to reaching that mark. Naturally, through the middle of the pandemic, we weren't advocating council suddenly selling properties for unpaid rates. However, yes, now that we're back into a normalised debtor management process, we are turning our mind to debt collection, and yes, that will be this consideration of this will be very much part of the equation. But I'm not sure how many properties there are. But we, if there was a sufficient number, we'd be then reporting back to council, recommending consideration of commencing such action, bearing in mind, members, that invariably when that trigger is pulled, more often than not, that will immediately trigger a response from the ratepayer, because invariably their financial institution or any party that's registered on their title will be advised as well. So invariably the banks get advised, and that's generally a trigger for the banks to intervene to pay the rates. So it's not, it is a process of last resort, noting that it's very rare that councils do sell properties for non-payment rates. Members might recall we did sell one a few years back, but that was really a nondescript, just a little laneway off High Street. And we have also had selling a property in conjunction with a third party on Krieg Road, and that settlement will be occurring later this month. And if we hadn't been able to negotiate that sale, that ratepayer would have triggered this clause well and truly. So I'm very glad that that settlement's occurred, because that will be about $18,000 of rates unpaid that we'll receive at settlement this month.
Thank you. Karen?
Just looking at this report, $100,000 was as a direct result of COVID and people delaying their rates payment, but we've still got 1.8, and it's effectively doubled. So from 30th of June 2019. So there's clearly other influences there. Yeah, so I don't know if it's just, I don't think $100,000 isn't a big impact. There's other factors. So I guess I'm quite keen to know what those other factors are.
Through the chair, bear in mind, members, yes, acknowledge that in recent years, 30 June 2019 was 942, jumped to 1.45 as at 30 June last year. It's important to note, members, though, the figure as at 31st December 2020 of 1.855, that's, we still have 2 quarters of rate payments to be received this financial year. So obviously I can't sort of guarantee with any sort of firm prediction what that figure will be as at 30 June 2021, but nonetheless we'll endeavouring to strive to get back far closer to our policy target of 4%.
Thank you. Natalie?
Just a couple of comments. I don't know, have you got any contacts out at Charles Sturt? Because my previous life, Charles Sturt's probably best practice at collecting outstanding rates. They've got it down pat, so that's Annette Martin's team. So they changed their process. They went back to the, telling people they were going to sell the properties, and they actually took it to the step before having to sell the property, but it worked, and they collected a lot of rates that way. They've got a really good process in place, so I'd say contacting them and also amping it up because I know Marion, their ratepayers were pretty good during COVID, so I think people do, because they've had the JobKeeper and all that kind of thing, that you might be surprised if you do implement the processes again, that you might be able to recover some of that money.
Thanks, Natalie. Yep.
Through the chair, yes, in relation to that, what we do find is when we have written to ratepayers relative to nearing that 3-year trigger, what we always do as a first point of call is say, you're nearing this trigger, and if you don't pay your rates, then council may turn its mind to considering forcing the sale. So that's a letter that we do send that might sound similar to what Annette sends at Charles Turton. Invariably, yes, that does trigger a response because you suddenly think, oh heck, I don't want to risk losing the house. So but we do those letters as appropriate.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, any further questioning on the data reporting? Got a recommendation that we note the data analysis as of 31 December 2020. Thanks, Paul. Seconded, Peter. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you. 6.7 is the procurement and business improvement update. Tara.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is really just an update on business improvement activities. Fair to say we haven't progressed as much as I would have liked, particularly in respect to documentation, primarily due to the demand for advice and support. There's been real improved awareness across the organisation on procurement and contract management probity requirements, which has meant that there's been a further requirement to provide advice and support to those teams. In addition, we've got a number of projects due to stimulus. We're up to 86 projects sitting in our project management framework that we're looking at. So just due to volume, the focus has really been on making sure that we comply with our policies on current projects, which has obviously impacted on our ability to put the documentation together. We are seeing some benefits though with the work that we're doing. Number of contract arrangements being established. We're putting in more rigorous contracts that previously weren't. The quality of documentation, particularly from the tender process, which means then you can attract better suppliers or make your business look more attractive to the market. And real benefit has been improved compliance through the contract register. We've been monitoring procurement processes and contracts, and so we've been following up. That's on a weekly basis with project teams and really using that as a basis for I guess increasing awareness and training. So rather than a formal training program, which was my initial approach, we've used other tactics through informal knowledge sharing, updates, monthly meetings with teams, and just sitting down. So it's been more of a hands-on approach than we initially envisaged, but I think we're seeing the benefits there.
Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Tara. It's a really good report to read. I've just got a question around the amount of work you're putting into advice and oversight, process oversight, which is sometimes a trap when specialist roles are put in. Business units see that as a great opportunity to cost shift, both time and their expertise, and it often exposes their lack of expertise. But that's not sustainable. So just some thoughts around how you will empower people to do their jobs.
certainly not doing their jobs for them. So it is advice. So I am doing a lot more. So when I first started in the role, I did put in an additional control around reviewing documentation for the more risky and high value projects. And that was really just to get an understanding of where we were and where the gaps were. I'm already finding that I've been able to hand off once I'm comfortable, and then it's just focusing on those the high risk, high value projects that we need. So it's not doing, it is advice. Yeah, it's just been time consuming. We've come from quite a lower level in some areas. Some areas are more mature and some others aren't. And we're tackling the high value, high risk capital projects in the first instance.
Karen?
Got a few questions. So that sounds great. But again, it's around that sustainability and making sure people are empowered and capacity is built. But also long term, as people come and go, how do we ensure, and maybe that's a question to you, CEO, how do we ensure that capacity is there for the employees, that may be future employees, so that we don't have to go through this process again and build capacity when we employ people, they should have that capacity. So what sort of processes and safeguards as regards to selection criteria and appointment ensure, so that we can have comfort that new employees that come into these particular roles that have procurement as a specialty will in fact have those skills?
Well, in terms of our recruitment processes, since Tara commenced or shortly thereafter, every new employee meets Tara to talk about procurement and relative to where they sit in the organisation, their level of responsibility in terms of procurement or otherwise. There's a focus in mentoring our leadership team. So we have a raft of experts in their respective fields, but they're not experts in procurement. So it's about how, through Tara's focus, entrenching not the centralised but the decentralised model of procurement. So as you've touched on, Karen, it's about making sure that the leadership team in particular, so that's not just the executive team, but all of our team leaders gradually increase their competencies in procurement, and becomes part of our corporate DNA that there is that greater level of sort of capability. And then as we do recruit specialists in their fields, yes, it will become an increasing expectation that they have greater awareness of procurement and the practices and procedures about procurement than probably what was previously the case. So my intent is very much to entrench the previous model, which was a decentralised model. Certainly Tara has been, as her nature is to help people, but she's increasingly saying no, and that that's your responsibility. But quality control and risk management is certainly a real filter for Tara, which is very much permeating through the organisation. And I think the fact that Tara reports directly to me also sends a strong message that this area is a critical sort of business function, and risk management is important, and that I think that certainly helped in terms of awareness and accountability, and people becoming a bit more conscious of their responsibilities.
Thank you. So can Tara just maybe respond to that?
In addition, so we've developed a suite of guidelines. They're in draft. We actually got them checked as part of the integrity framework review, got them to comment on those. So they'll be there, and then we will be rolling out some formal training, which will be done on an annual basis around the policy, and then there'll be some other training that we'll do, whether we'll work out the time frame, but yeah, so it's entrenched.
Sorry, Paul first.
Tara, I'm just wondering about the efficiency dividend. What do you expect there?
I'm struggling with quantifying the efficiency, the process efficiencies. So we are capturing that data, but how to quantify that, I'm still working on, and I think I'll talk to my ex-colleagues in state government and see if they've got, there's a model. Yeah, from a savings perspective, we do, there are some procurement savings. Again, not comfortable quantifying them just yet. We would wait till we've gone through the projects and the contracts finished. So it's about monitoring those contracts as well until we can really see what those savings are. Yeah.
Initially, there was a figure bandied about of $1 million. So it's interesting that the language has changed. So that was, we can save, that was CEO here, save $1 million. So, you know, is that achieved? Is that a bit aspirational, or are there opportunities there?
It is an aspirational target, most definitely. However, I think that was pre-COVID, pre-local economic stimulus as well, and we're really going to focus on aggregation, longer-term contracts. But I still think savings are achievable. We really need to look at the recurrent expenditure, and that goes hand in hand with service levels and understanding whether it's in-source or outsource. So that's where, I guess, our whole body of work is also really interrelated. Yeah.
Tara, if I can say, Adelaide Hills and Onkaparinga do very similar stuff, and they actually quantify as well the savings, recurrent one-offs, and actually put some good reporting what comes through in the Audit Committee. And interesting about the centralised, decentralised, Henry, because Playford, when their committee papers are on the website, I chair their Audit Committee, they're actually going from a decentralised to a centralised on the recommendation of Galpins as their internal auditor. So it's you know, again, it's each council for their own. Maybe they're so large and it was so decentralised that it just wasn't working enough that they thought they needed to bring it to a centre. But again, then it comes back to core people having procurement knowledge, understanding the framework, the systems, and how delegate all that works, and it's just been done. So we're not saying it's just going to be one person. I think there's going to be a procurement group, but it's more rather than just everyone going away. And I think that they worked out that they can do a lot of savings, and they know they've got a big procurement.
Sorry, there's benefits in both, but when you centralise, and often people use it as an opportunity to perhaps, you know, sit down and relax and let the person who's doing all the procurement hard work do all the work. And we certainly find that in health, that when you have specialty roles, it's an ongoing. You never really win the battle. You have to constantly, because you've got a constant turnover of staff, and you need to constantly build capacity and empower people rather than de-skill. We call it de-skilling. And it's very easy to do when you centralise. So I'm not a particular, there's a role for specialist advice, and I think you need it in this sort of fast sort of turnover world, but you also need to empower people, because otherwise you're going to be carrying a lot of dead wood.
Peter, you're going to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you live long enough, you go through centralisation, you go through decentralisation, and you get back, and you go round and round a circle. And I've never found out where the good point is. But I just wanted to say, I thought this was an excellent report. It's very well written, and it's honest and upfront, and I like that. If you can't do something, if you can't get the $1 million, well, at least be honest about it, and let's be realistic.
Thank you. Sorry, Natalie.
Just also make sure you remember at the beginning here we had the fraud risk review that was surrounding procurement, and you've got to make sure that those factors are in your framework, because that's where, and you've got to pass, you know, the pub tests in procurement is very, very important, especially in state and local government. I'm performing in contract management internal audit review for a state government organisation very soon, so happy to catch up and do a bit of a lessons learned exercise. once I'm done.
No further questions, so thank you, Tara. We've got the recommendation that we note the council comparative, oh no, got the jumping ahead. Business improvement update report. Someone to move that way, thanks. Peter, seconded, Natalie, all in favour? Okay, carried. Now we go to the comparative data. Now, Paul, this is back to June 19, though, isn't it? That's because you wait, it's a year behind, so do you want to talk to that much or?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, members will be aware that this is a report that's been done every year. It's not obviously a statutory report that we need to do, but I'd like to think members do find it of interest and benefit. I think it's certainly a useful tool, a benchmarking exercise to go through. I think, Chair, that really the three points for the key reference was the fact, and I've outlined them on page 35 of 43 of the agenda, was in relation to graph 8, the average residential rates. I think certainly personally pleased that it sort of validates that our rates are around about the mark, comparable with other councils. Then in relation to graph 10, relating to outstanding rate debtors, which we've just touched on a few items back, noting that our outstanding rate debtors again was comparable. It was on the lower end of the scale in comparison to other councils. And then relative to the net financial liabilities ratio, which is number 13, I believe, on page 127 of 149, I did also want to reference the fact that compared to the other councils in this comparison set, yes, we are at obviously the top end of the scale, but there's deliberate factors informing that for Town of Gawler. As we've, I think, noted in the attachment, Chair, obviously our ratio result has been predominantly informed by the capital investment we've done in major iconic assets in recent years, and that is similarly informs the Alexandrina outcome of 74%. We've noted in the report, I think there was a library at Strathalbyn or community centres there that they heavily invested in, which triggered their increase. So in saying that, members, what I'm meaning is that the ratio result for each council will be different at different points of time and different intervals of when key assets are due to be replaced. But as we've discussed, council has to be continually mindful of its liabilities ratio position, but certainly happy to answer any questions members may have.
Open up for questions. Karen?
I've got a question around Mount Barker, and they're a growth council, and they've got their net financial liabilities ratio is 2% in 2019, and they're a growth council. Have they got a larger split of commercial revenue? Is that the issue? I'm just surprised at some of their numbers.
Through the chair, Mayor, look, that's not really, unfortunately, a question I can answer in relation to their specifics, but I do know, that I think as, I'm not sure if I referenced it, on the table on the next page, on page 128 of 149, I guess what I do think it's sort of appropriate to point out is that depending on each council's individual budget from year to year, and they're particularly informed by their level of capital investment, you will find that the ratio results for each council can fluctuate from year to year quite materially, either up or down. But relative to Mount Barker, yeah, I can't give you any specific as to why it's so low, but yes, do recognise that they similarly are a growth council. And I think what's shown in here, Chair, as I've referenced in some of the comments to the graph, Mount Barker particularly had a major growth in 1819, as referenced by some of the graphs. So I think with the road lengths, for example, which is, I think, at the very start, I noted that, yes, that I was quite surprised. I've never seen a council in recent years that's had an extra 8 kilometres of roads in 1 year. So that would suggest, as is represented by a number of the other graphs, that they did have really major growth that year. So, but in relation to why their ratio, net financial liabilities ratio, is the position that it is, yeah, I unfortunately couldn't answer.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Peter?
The financial assistance grants, do you get that information out of this database for each council? So, because some councils obviously receive a high assistance grant because they've got a low capacity to generate rate revenue and whatnot. That's part of the forming quite a significant part. So if they're getting a higher FAG grant, then they can that compensates for their lower capability to generate rate revenue. So I always think it's important to see what the FAG grant is doing when you're comparing the rates for each council as well. So it might be worth looking at.
Through the chair, yes, that's certainly a valid point, and I've noted on page 114 of 149 relative to graph 8, the average residential rates, because I know historically, and again this year, you'll see Mount Gambier's average residential rates is far lower than any of the other councils, but you've only got to look, as I've noted on the commentary to that graph, that they do have their ability to do that is heavily influenced by the level of the FAGS grant they get. And I know there's a few councils, I think Wyalla's the same, that do get a proportionately high FAGS grant, which, yeah, assists those councils in being able to keep the rates at the level they can. No, but Peter, the stats from the Grants Commission, I think, do indicate what that level of grants is. But yeah, and look, that's relatively easy to find out. But I do know from historic conversations with the Grants Commission is that they deliberately, the criteria in working out the grant funding is that complex so that no one council can sort of manipulate the funding they get. So, yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you. We've got a recommendation that we note the Council Comparative Data Report as of 30th of June 19. Move on. That's seconded. Thanks, David. Seconded. Paul. All in favour? Okay, carries. We've got 2 policies: strategic rating policy and rate rebates policy. Paul, you want to please?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. Yes, these are two of the policies that are on the work plan to be reviewed, and just by way of quick background, the strategic rating policy is essentially our overarching policy dictating our rating methodology that we apply each year. And in recent years, there's been very little change to the policy. The only changes we're proposing is just to, I guess, provide some additional wording relative to a couple of policies that sit essentially beneath the strategic rating policy. And they are referenced, as I understand it, by way of track changes in the report. But for all intents and purposes, Chair, we're not proposing any change to the policy outside those subtle changes by track changes, because I believe the methodology approach we've used, which members may be aware, one of the key underpinning principles of that policy, which I believe has worked very well for us, is the tiered rating with commercial properties. And I'm still quite surprised and gobsmacked that other councils haven't considered it. Certainly from a commercial setting. I know, Peter, you had touched on at Salisbury still do it for a certain residential area, but that I believe in 2012-13 when we brought it in was a fundamental game changer for us for commercial ratepayers, and to this date I still have not had one complaint about the tiered rating. So yeah, we're certainly not advocating any material changes to that policy, Chair, and no changes whatsoever are we proposing for the rate rebates policy. But again, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. So any questions? Madeline?
Just if you're talking to Charles Sturt about rates anyway, maybe get a copy of their policy. I know they did a really big review a couple of years ago, just saying this is fine, but I suppose the question is, have you been benchmarking it against other councils or looking at what other councils do? And once again, as Charles Sturt had to do a big review a couple of years ago.
Yeah, through the Chair. We review this policy annually, so to make sure it's sort of best practice contemporary and the rates that we apply are sort of fair and equitable. What we've done in the last few years is essentially more of a sort of desktop review, but we do every sort of 3 to 5 years, Chair, do a sort of comprehensive review, and that does include, well, comparing, well, how's our rating structure way up compared to other councils. So we do that level of scrutiny at periodic intervals.
Thanks. Any other questions? No? Okay, so the recommendation then that we recommend to council that the following policies be adopted: the strategic rating and the rates rebate. Mover and seconder, please. Thanks, Peter. Seconded, David. All in favour? Okay, carried. Hughes. Audit Committee work plan update. Who's got this? Yep. Thanks, Paul.
Yes, through the Chair, this is our obviously the report we give to you each month outlining progress against the plan and earmarking with each of those actions when they're scheduled to be tabled to the committee. As you'll see from the plan, there are a number of items ongoing, a number that are similarly being completed. There are a few, note, that haven't been started, but that's simply because the trigger for that sort of process hasn't started. So at this stage, Chair, you're comfortable that we're appropriately progressing the completion of the work plan, but again, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions from the committee members? Looks pretty straightforward. It drives our future agendas. Now, Paul, obviously, so when we come to the main meeting, we'll then get this one because it's the last part of this, and then we get the next year's one at the same time, don't we? That's right. Okay. Okay. There's no further comments. Then we note the 2021 Audit Committee Work Plan update. Give it a second. Thanks, David. Seconded. Thanks, Natalie. All in favour? Carried. Audit Committee meeting dates. So we've got some dates. We're here meeting on the 10th. Paul, I've got a problem with the March one, only because our Audit and Risk Committee with my work, we're looking at resetting it, and it could be along that day. It's just that we've had a lot of strategic stuff happening. We had to do some scenario planning and all. That's all needed to take. So we were originally 2 weeks before this, but it could be in that. So can I maybe, the other dates, May, August, and November, I've got another meeting that Thursday. Can be brought a day forward, or yeah, the November one as well. So anyone else got, Natalie, I know they'll be looking at you're okay with these, Peter? That not travelling again, going away and you're all playing Australia, no more overseas trips. It's overseas. Yeah, so. Yes,
Being mindful of it, Chair, if the dates for the 25th of March and 11th of November don't suit yourself, happy to consider alternate dates, or we can take that on notice and get back to members with alternate dates.
I'll talk to you. Do you want to bring it earlier to that, or you don't want to move it forward here? I think you want to line it up at council meetings, correct?
Correct.
Yep.
The Thursday, the 25th of March, I don't really, I need to sort of have it round about then. I'm just conscious of the fact I think the discussion at that March meeting, whenever it is, would inform a discussion, I think, at a special council meeting scheduled for the 6th of April, I believe that's the date, because that will be heavily focusing on the draft budget. But I would have to work in conjunction with the Mayor and Henry about availability of members. So, yes, yeah. I think someone told me the 6th of April was Tuesday after.
Yes, the Tuesday after Easter.
Yeah.
Easter.
My apologies for that date.
Good Friday's the 2nd.
Yeah. Okay.
So Thursday the 1st. Thursday the 1st of April. Well, that's what we're trying to work out. So until we're not, it could be either early in the week or it could be later in the week. If it's early, then that date will suit. If it's going to be later, then we might need to make it either the 21st or the 22nd earlier in that week. Would that work with you? We have to bring it forward.
23rd. Okay.
No, that's what I'm saying. Until we know the dates. So 24th, earlier in the week could be work out, but you've got a council meeting on that on the Tuesday. So maybe that Monday?
Monday, which is the 22nd.
So I'll get back to you. I mean, we're confirming it by the end of this week because we've got to set those dates.
Just in terms of then with the recommendation, Chair, how do you wish to progress?
Schedule the following for 2021, subject to changes of the March and November to be confirmed, with March and November to be confirmed. So someone will move that way. Thanks, Peter. Seconded, David. All in favour? Okay, that's all of the officer reports. So we've got nil items listed for discussion. Items for the future meetings. I'm sure we've got a few things that came out from today's papers that we'll know will be brought forward to our future meetings, plus our audit work plan. There's nil questions without notice, no motions without notice. Officially close the meeting. Thank you. Oh, sorry, David.
Just an idea I had, which I wouldn't mind discussing, was just to put something for discussion for each audit meeting, because we've got 3 independent members that are involved with other audit committees, just to report back on anything innovative that their audit committee's looking at, or some way of reporting back some of the stuff that you guys like sort of learning and sharing that information back to the audit committee, because there's some fantastic things that other councils and organisations are looking at, and just a way of feeding that back to the committee.
Well, around any particular topic. So, I mean, as I said, Natalie's given a few examples today where she's found, but are you asking for us to actually sit back and do a presentation? No.
Not an actual report, but it's more like a reminder or something. I'm not actually after a report, and I think tonight's meeting has been really good. Natalie offering support to staff, which is fantastic, but just that it can be quite dynamic, some of the ideas that come up. Example is our rating policy, which no other council's taken on, which is for commercial, which and all councils do their commercial rating differently, and some have quite extraordinarily high commercial rates and things like that too. But just some ideas, but I don't want that to be arduous or anything like that. But sometimes I don't. And whether you think that's a great idea or not, I'm happy if you don't put it on.
All means, David, and like I said, depending and on the actual individual papers that come forward, I try and bring my knowledge of other audit committees, and again, I always know what council I think that are doing it bad, and I do say to them, contact so and so if you want to, so and so I think is doing their risk management really well, or absolutely doing really good internal audits. You can only refer them. And I think it's then the council staff, manager making contact with them. It's one thing I have noted in the local government sector. It's great sharing of information. They've got their little groups of the audit group and the finance group and the procurement group. So, so we're happy as the independents to bring that back to this committee as well. So thank you for that. Henry?
Through the chair, just to bring to the attention of the committee that Mr. Romano is retiring, and his last day at Gawler is next month, and this will be his last committee meeting. Is that correct, Tony? Your last committee meeting? Maybe. Anyway, so I just thought it'd be probably that the committee members know, because Tony's been an important part of the team relative to all the information that comes before the committee. So
Well, thank you for letting us know that. And Tony, from me, because I've been here a long time with you in the finance team, so thank you for your, all the papers that you put forward, your explanations of those papers, and you're always willing to, give us the advice as well. So thank you for that, and wish you all the best. Is it retirement or? It is, okay. No other council has poached you, so you're going to see a lot more of your beloved Port Power games, and there you go. Well, enjoy. Enjoy. Well. You can join in because these meetings are streamed when you're retired. It's only between 7 and 9. It's been streamed, live streaming. Okay, thank you all. Have a good night. Thank you.